Ever feel like you're a mystery, even to yourself? Like, why do I do the things I do? Well, today we're diving deep into the world of psychology to maybe uncover some of those answers. We're exploring Adrian Furnham's 50 psychology ideas you really need to know. So think of it as a crash course in understanding the human mind.
And what's great about Furnham's approach is that he doesn't just like throw textbook definitions at you. He gives you frameworks, different schools of thought, so you can kind of see how diverse the field of psychology really is.
Okay, so it's not just one big psychology blob.
Not at all. You've got your classic behaviorism, which is all about observable actions and how we learn through conditioning.
Right, like Pavlov's dogs.
Exactly. Salivating at the sound of the bell because they learned to associate it with food. That's behaviorism in action.
Right. But there's got to be more to us than just reacting to stimuli, right? Like, what about thoughts and feelings?
Well, that's where cognitive psychology comes in. It shifts the focus inward to those internal mental processes, like how we think. Remember, solve problems. It's like understanding the software running in your brain, so to speak.
So less drooling dogs and more figuring out how our brains actually work. But hold on, I've heard of this thing called the unconscious mind. Is that where things get really freaky?
Well, freaky might be one word for it. Furnham dives into this idea that there's a whole lot going on beneath the surface of our awareness, influencing our choices without us even realizing it.
Okay, so like an iceberg. You only see the tip, but there's this massive structure underneath
Exactly.
that is mind-blowing. So if we're not fully aware of why we do some things, does that mean we're basically robots programmed by our unconscious?
Not quite robots, but Furnham highlights this tension between our conscious beliefs and unconscious drives, which can lead to something called cognitive dissonance.
Cognitive dissonance. I've heard that term before, but I'm a little fuzzy on the details.
Well, it's that uncomfortable feeling when our beliefs clash with our actions.
Ooh, yeah. Like when I know I should be eating healthy, but I devour an entire bag of chips. Guilty as charged.
Exactly. That's cognitive dissonance in action. And to deal with that discomfort, we often rationalize our bad behavior or even change our beliefs to make ourselves feel better.
So our minds are doing mental gymnastics to avoid facing the truth. Sneaky. And this understanding can be applied to so many areas of life, from how we form opinions to why we stay in relationships that might not be working.
It's about recognizing the power of the unconscious and its influence on our everyday lives.
Exactly.
Wow. So we've got this unconscious mind pulling strings and then our conscious mind trying to make sense of it all. Sounds like human development must be a wild ride.
It definitely is. Furnham dives into the work of some heavy hitters in developmental psychology, Piaget, Erikson, Kohlberg. Each offers a framework for understanding how we grow and change throughout life.
Okay, so hit me with some highlights. What are the key takeaways here?
Well, Piaget focused on cognitive development, how our thinking abilities evolve over time.
He proposed that kids go through these distinct stages, from the sensory motor stage where they're all about exploring through the senses,
Right.
to the formal operational stage where they can finally grasp abstract concepts. Think of it like upgrading your brain's operating system over time.
So that's why toddlers put everything in their mouths and teenagers suddenly become obsessed with existentialism.
Exactly. It's like their brains are literally changing how they see the world.
Fascinating. What about Erikson? What did he focus on?
Well, Erikson took more of a psychosocial approach. He identified 8 stages, each with a social challenge we need to overcome.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Okay, so babies need to develop trust, toddlers need to assert their autonomy, teenagers grapple with identity, and adults search for purpose and intimacy.
It's like a roadmap for the social and emotional hurdles we face throughout life.
And then you've got Kohlberg, who comes in with his theory of moral development. He proposed 3 levels, from pre-conventional, where it's all about avoiding punishment, to post-conventional, where we've developed our own internalized principles of justice and fairness.
So we start off just trying not to get in trouble and hopefully end up with this strong internal compass guiding our decisions.
Exactly.
I like that progression. But I gotta ask this age-old question. How much of who we are is determined by our genes versus our environment? Is it nature or nurture calling the shots?
The classic debate. But Furnham really emphasizes that modern psychology recognizes the crucial role of both nature and nurture.
So it's not either.
Right. It's this complex interplay. Our genes might predispose us to certain traits, but our environment, our upbringing, experiences, relationships, that shapes how those traits are expressed.
So I might have the genetic potential to be a brilliant musician, But if I never touch an instrument, that talent might stay hidden.
Exactly. It's like nature provides the ingredients, but nurture is the chef who creates the final dish.
I like that analogy. Okay, so we've got a handle on some of the foundational concepts of psychology. But now I'm curious about the physical stuff. What's
Yeah.
going on inside our brains to make all this thinking, feeling, and behaving possible?
That brings us to the fascinating world of neuroscience, where we explore how the structure and function of the brain influences everything we do.
Awesome. Let's get into it.
One of the most amazing things about the brain is its ability to change and adapt throughout life.
Oh, you're talking about neuroplasticity.
Yes, it's what allows us to learn new skills, form memories, and even recover from injuries.
So our brains aren't just static lumps of gray matter, they're constantly rewiring themselves based on our experiences.
Exactly. And those connections between brain cells are made possible by these chemical messengers called neurotransmitters.
Okay.
They zip across these tiny gaps, called synapses, and transmit signals throughout the brain. Think of it like this complex communication network with billions of messages flying back and forth every second.
So when we're feeling happy or sad, are those just neurotransmitters doing their thing?
They definitely play a role. And, imbalances in these neurotransmitters have been linked to mental health conditions like depression and anxiety.
Wow, so the brain isn't just about thinking, it's the control center for our emotions and well-being, too.
The ultimate command center.
To illustrate just how crucial specific brain areas are, didn't Furnham talk about the case of Phineas Gage?
Yes, the railroad worker who had a metal rod go straight through his frontal lobe.
I remember that story. Didn't his personality completely change after the accident?
Yeah, he went from being responsible and hardworking to impulsive and erratic.
It's mind-boggling to think that physical changes in the brain can have such a huge impact on personality. It makes you realize just how delicate and intricate this organ really is.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've explored the inner workings of the brain, but I'm curious about how all this brain power plays out in our interactions with others. Let's dive into the social side of things.
That brings us to social psychology, where we explore how our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are influenced by, well, everyone around us.
Right, because we're not just isolated brains walking around. We're constantly interacting with and responding to the social world.
Exactly. Furnham highlights some classic social psychology concepts that reveal just how much our social environment shapes who we are.
Like what? Give me the juicy stuff.
Well, there's conformity, which is our tendency to go along with the crowd even when we know it's wrong.
Oh, right. Like Ash's famous line experiment.
Yes, where people conform to an obviously incorrect answer just because everyone else was giving it.
So peer pressure can literally make us doubt our own senses. That's a bit scary.
It is. And then there's obedience to authority, which Milgram's shock experiments really brought to light.
Oh, yeah, those were intense. People were willing to administer what they believed were painful electric shocks to another person simply because an authority figure told them to.
It really raises questions about the power dynamics and the conditions under which we obey, even when it goes against our own conscience.
It makes you think about all the times in history when people have followed orders that have led to terrible consequences. Just blindly following authority can be really dangerous.
It highlights the importance of critical thinking and the courage to question authority.
Okay, so we've got conformity and obedience, but what about how we behave in groups? Does being part of a group change how we act?
Of course, Furnham talks about some fascinating group dynamics, like groupthink, where the desire for harmony within a group can actually lead to bad decisions.
Yeah, because people are afraid to speak up and challenge the prevailing opinion.
Right, it's like when everyone goes along with a terrible idea just to avoid rocking the boat.
Happens all the time in meetings, unfortunately.
And then you've got social loafing, where people put in less effort when they're part of a team because they figure, well, someone else will pick up the slack.
Oh, I've definitely been guilty of that one. In group projects, it's
Yeah.
like you assume someone else is carrying the load so you don't have to work as hard.
And we can't forget the bystander effect, which is the tendency for people to be less likely to help someone in need if there are other people around.
Wait, seriously, so the more people witnessing a problem, the less likely anyone is to actually do something.
It's a diffusion of responsibility. Everyone assumes someone else will step up, so no one takes action. It's a reminder that sometimes we need to be the ones to break the cycle.
So social psychology really shows us that we're not just individuals operating in isolation. We're constantly influenced by the people around us, the groups we belong to, and the social norms that shape our behavior,
We're all interconnected.
for better or worse.
And now, after exploring how our brains work and how we interact in social situations, let's shift gears and dive into what makes each of us unique, our personality.
Okay, let's talk about what makes you, you and me, me. What are those core traits that define us as individuals?
But Furnham dives into various personality theories, but one of the most popular and well-researched is the Big Five model.
Oh yeah, the Big Five. I've seen those personality quizzes online.
Exactly. They often draw on this model.
Okay, so remind me, what are these Big Five traits and how do they shape our personalities?
Well, you've got openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Each trait exists on a spectrum, and we all fall somewhere along those spectrums.
Okay, so break it down for me. What would someone high or low in each trait be like?
Okay, so someone high in openness is imaginative, curious, and loves trying new things, whereas someone low in openness prefers routine and familiarity.
Gotcha.
Then you have conscientiousness, which is all about being organized, disciplined, and responsible. Low conscientiousness might mean being more spontaneous and carefree.
But perhaps a bit less reliable.
Exactly. Now, extroversion is all about how outgoing and social you are. High extroversion folks thrive in social settings, while those low in extroversion might prefer solitude in smaller groups.
Makes sense. What about agreeableness? Is that like how nice you are?
Pretty much. High agreeableness means being compassionate, cooperative, and trusting, while low agreeableness might mean being more skeptical, competitive, and assertive.
And finally, neuroticism. Is that just like how neurotic you are? Sorry, bad joke.
Haha, no worries. But yes, neuroticism is all about emotional stability. High neuroticism means a tendency towards anxiety, worry, negative emotions.
And low neuroticism means being more calm and even-tempered.
Exactly.
This Big Five model is really helpful for understanding why people approach the world in such different ways.
It is. And while the Big Five is a prominent model, Furnham also touches on other personality theories like Freud's psychoanalytic approach with the id, ego, and superego,
Right, Freud, of course.
and humanistic approaches that emphasize personal growth and self-actualization.
So Freud is all about those unconscious drives, and the humanistic folks are all about reaching our full potential.
You got it. And exploring these different perspectives helps us appreciate the vast spectrum of human personality.
It's incredible to think about how all these factors, our genes, our upbringing, our brains, our social experiences, all come together to shape who we are as individuals.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But there's so much more to uncover. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll be exploring the often misunderstood realm of psychological disorders and their treatment.
Okay, I'm ready to tackle those topics. Stay tuned, listeners, as we continue our journey through the fascinating world of psychology. Welcome back to our deep dive into psychology. We've explored a lot of ground so far, from the foundations of psychology to those unique personality traits that make each of us who we are.
Right, it's been quite the journey.
But now I'm really curious to tackle a topic that I think is often misunderstood, psychological disorders.
It's definitely an area shrouded in stigma, but I think it's so important to talk about mental health openly and honestly.
Okay, let's dive in. What exactly are psychological disorders and how common are they?
Psychological disorders, also known as mental illnesses, are conditions that impact our mood, our behavior, and our thinking. And they're a lot more common than you might think. Furnham points out that they encompass a wide range of conditions,
Okay.
but some of the most prevalent ones include depression, anxiety disorders, and schizophrenia.
I've definitely heard those names before, but I'm not sure I fully understand what they mean. What would someone with depression actually experience?
Well, someone with depression might experience persistent sadness, hopelessness, and just lose interest in things they used to enjoy.
So it's more than just feeling sad.
It really is. It's a very deep, pervasive feeling of despair that can impact their energy, sleep, appetite, and even their ability to concentrate.
That sounds incredibly difficult to live with.
And then anxiety disorders, those involve excessive fear, worry, and apprehension. That can be really debilitating.
So it's like your internal alarm system is constantly going off.
Exactly. Even when there's no real threat.
So it's more than just feeling nervous before a big presentation. It's like a constant state of unease.
Exactly. And it can manifest in different ways. You
Mhm.
have generalized anxiety disorder where someone just feels constantly on edge.
Right.
Or you have panic disorder where you have these sudden, intense episodes of fear, which are called panic attacks.
Right. Panic attacks. And there are phobias too, right?
Yes, those are intense, irrational fears of very specific things.
Like spiders or heights.
Exactly. Or even social situations.
It sounds like these disorders can really limit a person's life if they're constantly battling their own fear and anxiety.
And then we have schizophrenia, which is a bit more complex.
Okay.
It involves distorted thinking, perceptions, and emotions.
Mm.
Imagine having difficulty distinguishing between what's real and what's not.
Oh, wow.
Experiencing hallucinations like hearing voices or seeing things that aren't there, and holding really firmly to these beliefs that are not based in reality, which are called delusions.
That sounds incredibly frightening and disorienting.
It can be.
It must be really tough to navigate life with those experiences.
It really is.
Yeah.
And, it's important to remember that these are just a few examples of psychological disorders.
Right.
And the experiences of people within each of those categories can vary greatly.
So we shouldn't generalize or stereotype. Everyone's experience is unique.
Exactly. But the good news is, even though these disorders are serious, they are treatable.
Okay, that's good to hear. So what kind of treatments are we talking about?
Well, one of the most common forms of treatment is psychotherapy, also known as talk therapy,
Okay.
which involves working with a trained mental health professional
Okay.
to explore the underlying causes of a disorder and develop some coping mechanisms.
So it's about talking through your problems and coming up with strategies to manage them.
Exactly. And there are a lot of different types in psychotherapy, each with their own unique focus and techniques.
Okay.
For example, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is all about identifying and changing negative thought patterns and behaviors that contribute to a person's distress.
So it's like retraining your brain to think and react differently.
Precisely. Then you have psychodynamic therapy, which delves into a person's past experiences and unconscious conflicts
Oh, wow.
to gain insight into the roots of their current challenges.
So if someone has a fear of abandonment, this type of therapy could help them understand where that fear came from.
And how it's impacting their relationships now.
Interesting. Are there any other types of therapies that you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, there's interpersonal therapy, which focuses specifically on improving a person's relationships and social skills.
Because our connections with others are so important.
Yes, they really are. And while therapy is really powerful, sometimes medication can also play a role in managing certain psychological disorders.
Right, especially if there's a strong biological component.
Exactly, like with schizophrenia or severe depression.
In those cases, medication can help to regulate brain chemistry and alleviate some of the symptoms.
And there's also been this growing interest in alternative and complementary therapies to support mental health.
Oh, like what? I'm really interested in holistic approaches to well-being.
Well, mindfulness-based therapies like MBSR and MBCT have become really popular. They teach people to become more aware of their thoughts and feelings without judgment.
So it's about learning to observe those thoughts and emotions without getting carried away by them.
Exactly. And things like yoga, acupuncture, even just spending time in nature have been shown to have positive effects on mental health.
It's all connected.
And I think it's important to emphasize that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to mental health treatment.
Right, everyone is different.
It often takes some trial and error to find the right combination of therapies and strategies.
It's a journey of self-discovery.
And the most important message is that seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
It's okay to not be okay.
Exactly. If you're struggling with your mental health, please reach out to a trusted healthcare professional. There are resources available to help support you.
That's so important. Okay, so we've explored the realm of psychological disorders and treatments. Now I'm curious about how we can actually put all this knowledge about psychology into practice.
Well, that brings us to the fascinating area of applied psychology.
So this is where we see how all this knowledge about human behavior and thinking and emotions can be used to make a real difference in the world.
Exactly. Furnham highlights how applied psychology is making waves in fields like education, the workplace, healthcare, and even decision-making.
Okay, tell me more. I'm really intrigued.
Well, in education, applied psychology has led to the development of more effective teaching methods.
So it's not just about standing at the front of the classroom and lecturing.
Not at all. It's about understanding how people learn best.
Taking into account things like memory and motivation.
Exactly. And different learning styles, so educators can create more engaging and impactful learning experiences.
So instead of a one-size-fits-all approach, it's about tailoring teaching methods to meet the individual needs of each student.
Now, in the workplace, we have IO psychology, or industrial organizational psychology, which focuses on optimizing productivity, job satisfaction, and the overall work environment.
Right, I've heard of that. It's about making work a more positive and productive experience.
Exactly. IO psychologists use these psychological principles to improve everything from hiring practices and employee training to team dynamics and leadership development. They
Wow.
even design workspaces that are more ergonomic and just conducive to well-being.
It's fascinating that psychology is used even in those areas.
It really is. And applied psychology is transforming healthcare too. You have health psychologists who are really on the front lines of promoting healthy behaviors, helping people manage chronic illnesses, and just improving the overall patient experience.
So it's not just about treating the physical symptoms, it's about addressing the psychological and emotional aspects as
It's
well.
a more holistic approach.
And then there's behavioral economics, which I find really interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
It combines psychology and economics to understand how things like cognitive biases can influence our decision making.
Right. It's like understanding how our brains can trick us into making decisions that aren't really in our best interest.
Especially when it comes to things like money.
Exactly. And behavioral economists use these insights to design policies and interventions that nudge people towards making more rational choices.
That's so interesting. Like you're using psychology to help people make smarter decisions.
Yes, you're basically giving them a gentle push in the right direction.
And as we can see, applied psychology is a vast and dynamic field that's constantly evolving and expanding its reach. It's about translating psychological knowledge into practical solutions that make a real difference in people's lives.
It really is. So as we move toward the final part of our deep dive, what are some of the things that have stood out to you so far?
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, but I'd love to hear from our listeners as well. What insights or concepts have resonated the most with you?
Hold on to those thoughts as we wrap up our exploration of Furnham's 50 psychology ideas in the next part.
Welcome back to the deep dive. It's been quite a journey exploring the world of psychology, hasn't it?
It really has. We've covered so much ground, from the foundations of the field to those unique personality traits that make us who we are. We even delved into psychological disorders and how they're treated.
And we saw how psychology isn't just an academic subject, right? It's a powerful tool that's being applied in the real world to make a positive difference.
Exactly. So much to unpack from just one book.
Right. Adrian Furnham's 50 Psychology Ideas You Really Need to Know has really given us a lot to think about.
It has. But now I'm curious, what does it all mean?
Yeah, how can we use this knowledge to improve our own lives?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's not just about accumulating all this knowledge, but actually understanding it, applying it.
Right. Making our lives and the world a little bit better.
Exactly.
One of the biggest takeaways for me is that psychology is everywhere.
It really is.
It's not just something you study in school, it's happening all around us constantly.
Whether we're aware of it or not.
Right. Psychological principles are at play in our relationships, at work, in our communities.
Even in our own minds.
Exactly. So by understanding these principles, we can start to see ourselves and the people around us in a whole new light.
It's like having this secret decoder ring for human behavior.
I love that analogy. And that deeper understanding, it can lead to more empathy and compassion,
Absolutely.
more appreciation for just how complex we humans really are.
It can empower us, too.
Oh, yeah.
Well, think about it. You can make more informed choices,
Okay.
build stronger relationships, create a more fulfilling life.
Okay, but how do we actually put this knowledge into practice? Can you give me some concrete examples?
Sure. Remember cognitive biases, those mental shortcuts.
Yeah.
By recognizing them, we can become more aware of how our thinking might be skewed.
Oh, I see. Leading to better decisions.
Exactly. So instead of just impulsively buying something because it's on sale, you can stop and think, do I really need this? Does this align with my goals?
I like that. So I'm not just a slave to marketing tricks and advertising.
Yeah. Right. And speaking of marketing, think about the principles of persuasion. By understanding how they use psychology to shape our opinions, well, we become more critical consumers.
We're not as easily swayed by manipulative tactics.
Exactly.
Okay, what about relationships? How can psychology help us there?
Well, we all have different attachment styles, right? Different ways of relating to others. Understanding those patterns can help us create healthier, more secure relationships.
So if I know I tend to be anxious in relationships, I can communicate my needs more effectively and maybe choose partners who are a bit more emotionally secure.
Exactly. And don't forget those insights from social psychology.
Okay, remind me.
Conformity, groupthink, all those things. Understanding them can help us navigate group situations more effectively, recognizing potential pitfalls.
Making sure our voices are heard.
Exactly.
But maybe most importantly, just understanding mental health can help us break down stigma, seek help when we need it, and support others who are struggling.
Couldn't agree more.
It's a reminder that mental health is just as important as physical health, and that there's no shame in seeking help.
None at all.
Yeah.
And remember, the journey of self-discovery, well, it never really ends.
True.
There's always more to learn, more to explore, more ways to grow.
Learning about cytology is like peeling back the layers of an onion,
Huh. I like that.
constantly revealing new depths and complexities.
And it can be challenging,
Yeah,
but also incredibly rewarding.
so true. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of psychology. I hope you've learned some valuable insights.
Me too.
And that you have a newfound appreciation for just how powerful this field really is.
I hope you'll continue to explore and use this knowledge to make your life and the lives of those around you even better.
Beautifully said. And that's it for this deep dive. We'll see you next time, listeners, for another fascinating exploration.